good state right now. That one needs to be fixed, unfortunately. Gotta wear some parts. Got it? Jaya Radha Om Jnanatamandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurue Namah. I put it back up. Shri Chaitanya Manovistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Antikam. These things give me a rash.
You need a sharp one?
Yeah, it's a sharp. Vandayam Shri Guru Shri Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Sta Shri Rupam Shagajatam Sagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitam Sta Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopaka Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavani Ishvare Visvabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarobhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Mare Kabando Matsangin, Madguru Madmadana, Madnistaraka Madbhagya, Madananda Namostute, Asadu Sadu Tadayin, Hadini Chotatakara, Hanamuncha Karachinmam Premno Ritkatayo Spura Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 1, text number 31. Yeah. Narayanam Maskrutanam Javinotam Devyam Saraswatim Vyasam Tatojam Madhuraya Nasta Presha Bhadrishu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavata Vitamashasri Bhakti Bhakti Nashtake. So it's prose, so we'll just read it and then we'll go through the verse. Yevahu hata rata charanani mi kriti parikatas te sapta sindava asanyata eva krita sapto bhuvo dvipa. Ye, that. Va, va uha, certainly. Tat rata, of his chariot. Charana, of the wheels. Nimi, by the rims. Krita, made. Parikataha, trenches. Te, those. Sapta, 7. Sindavaha, oceans. Asan, became. Yataha, because of which. Eva, certainly. Kritaha, were made. Sapta, 7. Bhuvaha, of the Bhumandala. Dvipaha, islands. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. When Priyavrata drove his chariot behind the sun, the rims of his chariot wheels created impressions that later became 7 oceans, dividing the planetary system known as Bhumandala into 7 islands. Please repeat. When Priyavrata drove his chariot behind the sun, the rims of his chariot wheels created impressions that later became 7 oceans, dividing the planetary system known as Bhumandala into 7 islands. Purport. Sometimes the planets in outer space are called islands. We have experience of various types of islands in the ocean, and similarly, the various planets divided into 14 lokas are islands in the ocean of space. As Priyavrata drove his chariot behind the sun, he created 7 different types of oceans and planetary systems, which altogether are known as Bhumandala or Bhuloka. In the Gayatri Mantra, we chant Om Bhur Bhuvaswa Tat Savitor Varenyam. Above the Bhuloka planetary system is Bhuvarloka, and above that is Swargaloka, the heavenly planetary system. All these planetary systems are called Savita, the sun god. Are controlled by Savita, the sun god. By chanting the Gayatri Mantra just after rising early in the morning, one worships the sun god. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamini Dinamane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Prachadati Nirvishesha Shanyavadi Pasitadeshatadini. So a few points to be made here. It's a nice verse. We're in the 5th canto, which is the canto which is primarily associated with the topic of stanam. It's described Atra Sagar Visarga Sta, Stanam Poshanam Utayaha, Manvantara Isha Anukata, Nirado Muktirashrayaha. There's 10 topics of Srimad Bhagavatam. Sarga, creation, Visarga, and subcreation. That really consists of 2, 3, and 4. Those cantos are Sarga and Visarga. We hear about Sarga, how Lord Vishnu breathes out the universe, and how the Mahatattva was agitated by his glance, and so forth. We hear about Visarga, how Lord Brahma creates various sages and various entities whom then populate the universe. And primarily, in terms of human society, we hear about Swayambhuva Manu and his wife Shatarupa, and their children Akuti, Devahuti, Prashuti, Uttanapad, and Priyavrata. So we're still hearing to a degree about Priyavrata, and this is what they call the creation of the 4th order, which is what we were called last, is how were things created after Brahma. So with that being said, we're hearing some of the extraordinary activities of the great devotee Maharaj Priyavrata. And we're hearing how he was able to create sunshine in the night and keep the world warm throughout the whole year for the purpose of creating more abundance. Now, it's described in the last purport how he was not competing with the sun god. Vaishnavas don't compete with other Vaishnavas. It's a very important point to be made there. But with this purport, it's kind of, this is one of those things that's perhaps a little above my head or most people's heads when you get into these kind of topics regarding the cosmology of the universe. But I actually studied this a little more than I think some devotees do, because I read some various books about it. Madhavendra Puri Prabhu has a book actually on cosmology, which I've kind of delved into, a really powerful book. But one thing to be noted is that when Shukadev Goswami later in this canto begins to speak about Bhumandala, he says, no one in all the 3 worlds can understand Bhumandala, but I will describe it the best of my knowledge. So basically, this world is not understandable by the gross senses. And because our senses are limited, because our perception, because our consciousness, we're limited to seeing only certain things. And we may not be able to understand, the Bhumandala and how there are 7 varshas within the Bhumandala. There's 7 varshas. 7, and there's all the dweeps, Jambadweeps, right? There's all these different dweeps. And within the dweep we're in, there's 7 varshas. And in Bharat Varsha, there's 7 khans. And we're in what's called Bharat Khand of the Bharat Varsh. And so there's a broader Bharat Varsh, which is the Earth planet, or the planet we live on. And in that broader Bharat Varsh, it's hard to imagine that there, according to what our devotees who are in charge of the TOVP are saying, which could be taken with a grain of salt, is that there are other Himalayan mountains. So they say so many things. But one thing we can understand, what Shukadev Goswami says for certain, is that no one can understand. So you can't understand. That's what Shukadev Goswami says. But nonetheless,
the topic of Shtanam isn't spoken about so that we can have some understanding as to where we're at, because we have imperfect senses. And we can understand to some degree by deriving what we've already learned in Krishna consciousness and understand that this is beyond our conception, but we can take the knowledge of the Bhagavatam as fact. Because when you see someone, we have a bhakta come in. Sometimes we had one bhakta, an atheist scientist, but he was interested in reading the Bhagavad Gita. So you meet a bhakta, they're atheist scientists, they're agnostic, whatever. And in the process of them taking prasadam, you preaching to them hearing Hari Katha and associating with devotees, their perception completely shifts. And all of a sudden now I'm seeing God. Not necessarily seeing Krishna face to face, but we're seeing God. And devotees have an experience of God every day. They can't deny God's existence. God is existing everything they do, and we experience that. And that's why devotees are so devoted, because devotional service and the process of bhakti yoga that Prabhupada gives us is a process by which we expand our consciousness and purify our senses. And through purifying the senses, one can understand full well that the holy name is non-different from Krishna, that the deity is non-different from Krishna, that Mahaprasadam is non-different from Krishna, that a Vaishnava is not a normal person. And they can understand that when you serve Krishna, all these amazing and miraculous things happen so that we can facilitate that service. And in the last verse, Dhira Prabhu spoke on, we were hearing about how Maharaj Priyavrata was able to do wonderful things because of him being a great devotee of the Lord, which leaves us another topic which we'll go into. It's like I said, I'm a little bit lacking on being able to describe the 14 lokas and how this, where these 7 rivets are, because I've heard devotees say, it's the 7 oceans and the 7 continents, and where it's the 7 planets in this solar system. So there's so many things to say. But from a higher perception, when beings gain a higher perception, they can see things in a different way. And even Srila Prabhupada, there's one quote by Srila Prabhupada where he was saying he was seeing demigods come in and out of the Swiss mountains. And actually that was later in his Leela, but they had this on the TOVP when you were there. They had all these quotes by Srila Prabhupada about the TOVP, lining the edge of the fence, the construction fence, and then me and Bala, Gopinath Prabhu, were walking once and we saw this quote, this very far out quote, Prabhupada saying that there are aliens and demigods flying in and out of the Swiss mountains, the Swiss Alps. So higher level beings can perceive things we can't perceive. And one analogy that's been given, which I find very appropriate and which I think we can experience to some degree, is that you can go to a location, but you may not be able to understand what's there. For instance, we understand that there's beings on the sun, there's beings on the moon, but when we look at the moon with a telescope, we don't see, moon men walking around. And when we look at the sun, we just go blind. So it's hard for us to imagine that there are beings on these planets. And when we go to even places like Mayapur, Vrindavan, we understand Krishna's in Vrindavan and Lord Chaitanya is in Mayapur, but sometimes we don't see Lord Chaitanya in Mayapur. But we can begin to perceive, especially in Mayapur, my experience is that sometimes you're so close and you just feel like it's just one little twitch of the knob and your Panchatattva is going to be dancing. It really feels that way. And there's one particular place in Mayapur. It's just a busy street corner. And it's basically where the Jalangi meets the Ganges. And so this is a place where things have been happening since Lord Chaitanya's time, because it's a significant place. It's where the Jalangi meets the Ganges. So you can go to either the Grajum Island or you can go across the river to Navadweep. And so this is a busy area even in that time. So you just know that the Panchatattva was there. And when I'm there, it's so loud. I mean, it is so loud because they have these giant buses and they have these horns that go. And they're just so loud, like it's incredibly loud. And you're trying to buy something in a shop, and then there's millions of rickshaws screaming and honking. It's just so cacophony, chaotic. But somehow or another, it's my favorite spot in Mayapur because when I'm there, I just feel like the Panchatattva is just just turn the knob 1 degree, and all of a sudden the Panchatattva Kirtan's going on. Actually, the whole cacophony is just Yoga Maya covering over that Kirtan of the Panchatattva. And so the analogy that's been given is that if you have a graph, an XY graph, you can go to a location on the x-axis. You can go to Vrindavan on the x-axis. I'm in the earth Vrindavan. I'm standing here. But you're not in Vrindavan on the y-axis. And in order to go into where Krishna's Leelas are taking place, you have to access the y-axis. You have to access that state of consciousness by which you can see what's actually taking place. And so when one goes to the moon or goes to the sun just looks like a big ball of flaming plasma, combusting hydrogen fusion. And so we're not perceiving that there are beings there. However, when you go to the y-axis, when your consciousness is expanded enough, all of a sudden the sun is a planet and there's beings there, there's living entities there. And there was once one, Sri Prabhu told me this story, Srila Prabhupada was speaking of the mystic cities and how there's one mystic city, one can walk on the sun rays, which I'm seeing right now. Prabhupada was saying, he says, I've experimented before about walking on the sun rays. So interesting kind of point. Srila Prabhupada truly had all mystic power. So that's one way we can understand how this system works, that what we're seeing, this round earth situation, this way we're seeing the earth isn't necessarily the same way the demigods are seeing the earth. Because they have higher levels of sense perception, they have higher levels of consciousness. And as we expand our consciousness, we can begin to accept somehow or another. It's really miraculous. We know this is a miraculous process. We can take a person who's logical, scientific, well-versed in material facility in the world, and we can convince them that God is a blue cowherd boy who pees on the gopis' floor when they don't give him butter. And we've seen that people in such states of being fully embrace this fact that God is a blue cowherd boy who steals butter and sometimes urinates on the gopis' floor. It's really far out. How do we take a person and convince them of this? We don't, Krishna does. And this is the real miraculous element of it. And not only do they, they're not just believing this stuff. It's not like they're sometimes born devotees, people who are born in the movement or born Hindus. They accept these things in a very sentimental way. But, for a logical person, regular material Joe, to convince them of something like this seems really wild. But they're experiencing so much when they chant Hare Krishna. They're experiencing so much in the kirtan and so much when they're reading the books and so much when they're taking prasadam that they're somehow able to be convinced factually that God is Krishna, Krishna is God. They can understand that. And so in a similar way, we may not have the perception to perceive some of these realities in which the Bhagavatam is going to speak about in the 5th canto about the earth, but we can at least take it that the beings who are saying this, such as Shukadev Goswami, they do have the qualification. And so in that way, the Bhagavatam is giving us a better presentation as to what is the planetary situation than any scientist can give. And it should be noted that when one reads a scripture, scripture always has a purpose, and this is described by our acharyas. Atra sagar visagar stanam poshanam uttayaha nirado muktir ashrayaha manvantar isha anukatar nirado muktir ashrayaha. There's 10 topics in Srimad Bhagavatam, but all those 10 topics serve the 10th topic, which is ashraya, which is the summon bonum Krishna consciousness. They're all serving that topic. And so even in the Vedas, there's differentiations between cosmologies. For instance, the Surya Siddhanta basically describes scientific understanding almost to the mile as to the distance between the sun, the moon, the earth, all of the planets. It describes it in perfect detail. They understood this in the Surya Siddhanta. We see a different presentation in the Puranas. Now we can look at that in different ways. One way we can look at that is that there's different perceptions, and the Puranas are being spoken from a higher perception. But another thing to understand is that what the Puranas are presenting is that they're presenting a life way. How do you say it? A light. How do I say it? A worldview. They're presenting a worldview by which one can attain the summum bonum, Krishna consciousness. We all have different worldviews, and they're not necessarily wrong. I mean, science has reality to it. No one can deny that. When you look at math works. Math is proof of God. That why should this math reflect the reality? So there are elements to science that are real, and we accept that. We're using electricity. We're using this microphone. This is all scientific understanding. And in the same context that these things are working, those same scientists are presenting a worldview which is dead, which is atheistic. And therefore, the science that they have is being used basically for war. Almost all the inventions were originally invented for war. The internet was invented for war. Everything's used for war. Nuclear energy is so powerful. Immediately, first thing they do with it is they build 2 atom bombs and kill 600,000 people. So this is the nature of the worldview in which science is presenting, an atheistic worldview, which is based on fearing. Now, what the Bhagavatam is presenting is a worldview which is going to facilitate our Krishna consciousness. So sometimes I asked one senior devotee, well, I didn't ask him, Gauranga Prem was there. We asked, one devotee asked another senior devotee, very intelligent devotee, about how do you understand these planetary systems in the 5th canto? And what he said was, I mean, I accept it, but, I can't necessarily understand it, because I can't perceive these things. But one thing I do know is that the Bhagavatam is giving me a worldview by which is favorable for me to develop bhakti. You see that we see all this. What is a tree? A tree is a biological organism that comes from a seed, and it creates photosynthesis is there, and it's giving off oxygen and absorbing carbon dioxide. That is a tree. We can also say, what is a tree? A tree is a spirit soul full of knowledge and bliss that's part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that's associated with the mode of ignorance, so much so that it's had to take a tree body. Both of those are true observations, but one observation is favorable for developing Krishna consciousness, and one observation is not favorable. So therefore, Bhagavatam is presenting a favorable worldview to accept Krishna consciousness. And that's how we can take this sthanam topic as to how these universal systems are working, how these 7 islands, 7 planetary systems, all these things are working. We can accept that by accepting the Bhagavatam. It's favorable for our Krishna consciousness. It's presenting a worldview that's favorable for Krishna consciousness. And therefore, there's a verse where Narada Muni describes, he says, Tadvaj Vishago Janatagam Lipavo Yasmin Pratishlokam Abhadavyat Yapi Namanyantas Yason Kintani Yad Shrinvanti Gayanti Grinati Saravaha. This is where Narada Muni is speaking to Vyas about the Vedas and about the various literatures he's written, and he's condemning them. He says they're Tadvayasam Tirdam. They're places of pilgrimage for crows. Then he says, on the other hand, Tadvaj Vishargo, Janatagam Lipbabo, these words which are full of the narrations of the pastimes, glories, activities, qualities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, are of another creation altogether, full of transcendental words, meant to bring about a revolution in the impious lives of this world's misdirected civilization. Although such works are imperfectly composed, they are heard, sung, and accepted by purified men who are thoroughly honest. So Narada Muni is saying here that these works are imperfectly composed. And Prabhupada quotes that verse in the beginning of his introduction to Srimad Bhagavatam. And that is one of the only verses in Bhagavatam that's said twice verbatim. It's said in the 1st canto and it's said in the 12th canto. So imperfectly composed, meaning that all of the living entities have imperfect senses, and we can understand things based on parampara. But they're heard, sung, and accepted by purified men who are thoroughly honest. Now, what does that mean? That means that a person who has purity of heart, a sadhava, someone who's a sadhu, who's qualified to lead, who's qualified to teach, who's qualified to make a society in which people can perceive God, such persons accept these literatures. They're heard, sung, and accepted by purified men who are thoroughly honest. So we see that the scientific worldview, it may have truth to it, but who's hearing, singing, and accepting it? The worst, and I mean this with full sincerity, the worst of humankind accepts some of this stuff. And we're seeing it now, these big atheist people, these really big anti-God people, where were they hanging out? They were hanging out on that island in the Atlantic, in the Pacific. All of them, all these big atheists that we fight with everybody, they're out there with Epstein. So they're just horrible, essentially, because there's no God in control, there's no consequences. It's Charbak Muni's philosophy. And except it's not, Charbak Muni was pious enough to just talk about ghee. These living entities are not trying to get ghee, trying to get the most heinous crimes against humanity imaginable, using young girls and so forth. So the worldview the science is presenting us is totally depressing. It's totally miserable. You're a bunch of chemicals, and all the happiness you ever feel is a chemical reaction. I remember being in school, and I was, this teacher, who actually I'm grateful for, he did teach me things that I really value about nutrition and stuff. But one thing he said, the heart has no feelings. The heart's just a muscle for pumping blood. There's no emotions in the heart. They're just chemicals in the brain, which is not even scientifically correct, because the heart has a lot of neurons in it. It's Heart Science Institute. It's understood now. But nonetheless, his dead worldview only facilitates, let me enjoy as much as I can before I die. It's the demoniac philosophy. And therefore their anxiety is immeasurable. So when we accept the Bhagavatam worldview, when we accept that we're on this Bharat Varsh, what is Bharat Varsh? There's a special quality to Bharat Varsh according to Srimad Bhagavatam. Bharat Varsh is the place in which souls can accrue karma. All the other planetary systems are simply results of those activities. When you go to the higher planetary systems, that's a reward for what you did here. When you go to lower planetary systems, that's a punishment for what you did here. So this Bharat Varsh is like a crossroads. It's a very special place. And so you see the significance that gives in our life when we accept that if I behave a certain way, I'm going to have a bad result. If I behave another way, I'm going to have a good result. Therefore, it behooves me to behave in devotional service. And therefore, if the world was run by those who understand this, think about how beautiful the world would be. For instance, a lot of people talk to me, and I'm talking devotees generally, they're really, the Bible's nonsense, the Bible's trash, we don't believe in the Bible. Okay, I'm not saying that I'm like, I'm a Christian, and I love Jesus, my name is Christian, but my birth name, but I mean, the Bhagavatam is the supreme scripture. I understand that. But I say, okay, when they take the Bible in this way of just like this literal way and they get so crazy, but if actually they lived by the teachings of Jesus, listen to the Sermon on the Mount. If they lived by those teachings, the world would be a better place. Thou shalt not kill. It's like Manjio last night. We went to talk to one of these Christian guys on the campus, and he was saying, he brought the Prabhupada point up, thou shalt not kill. He says, well, what they mean is thou shalt not murder. And he just said, well, you're murdering the animals. So that's their excuse. Well, it doesn't mean, it means murder, meaning humans, but actually, can't you murder an animal? So it's just nonsense. So in any case, the whole scripture's purpose is to facilitate love for God. That's what it's facilitating. It's facilitating love for God. And all of these things are in one sense irrelevant, not the Bhagavatam, but the Vedic literatures. And Krishna even says that. He says, transcend the Vedas. The Vedas deal mainly with the three modes of material nature. So why do they exist? Why do the Vedas exist? Why do we have Karmakanda scriptures? we understand that they're really useless on the highest level. I mean, Narada Muni spends an entire half a canto practically just telling a story to demonstrate the uselessness of karmakanda. I mean, the whole fourth canto is basically condemning karmakanda. You start off with with Daksha doing karmakanda. Shiva, beats him up and he gets his head cut off and he has to get a goat head. Then you hear about Prithu doing karmakanda, doing the horse sacrifices, Indra getting jealous. Krishna comes down and says, you're already liberated. Why are you even doing this? You're already a pure devotee. Then you hear about Paranjana, Parchini Bari, doing all these animal sacrifices, and Narada Muni just condemns that. And then he gives another analogy to condemn it. So it's a very common theme in the fourth canto. This theme of, and Dhruva, Dhruva wasn't even doing karmakanda in a sense, but Dhruva he had a material desire. He was really wanting material desire, so he was approaching the Lord, which is better than karmakanda, but still it's a material desire. So it's continuously condemned. But why is it there then? Because it's meant to ultimately facilitate you to come here. That's the whole process. That's the whole idea, is that, okay, people are attached to dharma, kama, artha, moksha. People are attached to these things. They want these things. You can be two types of persons. There's two types of materialists. There's the gross materialists who just basically want to enjoy without scripture, animal life. I'm going to have sex with whoever I want. I'm going to eat whatever I want. I'm going to do whatever I need to do to make money. Animal life. And then you have the pious materialist, which means I'm going to have sex in marriage. I'm going to make money through worshiping Lord Shiva, worshiping the demigods. I'm going to do all these things through a religious way. And in this way, I'm not going to accrue sin, you see. I'm not going to accrue sin. However, nonetheless, the idea is that one who does karmakanda, he has to go to a priest. Ideally, the priest is a devotee. And as he goes to worship the demigods, they always give oblations to Vishnu. All the Vedic sacrifices contain Vishnu's names. And they're giving oblations to Vishnu, and so therefore they're getting purified. And after fully, enjoying dharma, artha, and kama, the idea is that I kind of want moksha now. And so they kind of go to a higher level. And they go to a higher level, and the hope is that at some point they meet a pure devotee of the Lord and they can become devotees. That's the whole reason behind these pious things, because we understand people are going to eat meat. I mean, ideally, just be a sannyasi, just give up everything and go chant Hare Krishna. Why do we even need any facilities, marriage? And we don't need any of it. We just need to do pure devotional service. It's right there. Prahlad Maharaj, he says it. Tad sadhu manye suryavarya dehinam sada samudvinga diyama sadgrahat hitvatma patam griyamanda kupam vanagato yadaryamashriyeta. Oh, best among the asuras, why are you wasting your time in this household life? It's hitvatma patam, it's the death of the soul. Griyamanda kupam, it's the dark well of material existence. Therefore, go to the forest and take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's the ultimate instruction. So why do all these things exist? Because living entities come to this material world for two purposes. One reason is to fulfill desires. Another reason is to become liberated from desires. So the idea is that one fulfills their desires in such a way that they can become liberated from them. Prabhupada uses the analogy of removing a thorn with another thorn. They fulfill their desires in a way that they can become purified. And so the good karma, it purifies them, and they have the hope of meeting a pure devotee. And it is there. And we see that demonstrated in the Vedic literature. We see about, King Nriga. King Nriga was doing so much karma kanda, but he got to meet Krishna. And so these pious beings, these demigods, they have a higher chance of having these experiences. We see that Nala Kuvera and Manigriva, they had the pious credit of being born from the Kuvera. But they were, grossly enjoying women naked in the river. And Narada Muni walked by and they didn't cover themselves. And therefore they had to become trees. But they met a pure devotee, you see. If they were, I guess here in Tucson maybe, but if they were, the likelihood of meeting Narada Muni on First Avenue is a little bit lower in the higher planetary systems. But nonetheless, they may meet, Parameshwar Prabhu walking around out there, and he may send them back to Godhead. But you see, they had this opportunity to meet Narada Muni, and they were cursed. But what was the result? They got to see Krishna. After seeing Krishna, they're completely purified, pure devotees, you see. So in this way, these scriptures are facilitating a worldview by which one can attain Krishna consciousness, the experience of God consciousness. So if we take the scripture in the wrong way, then we're not gonna get the result. And that's why we can look at so many things in this particular section of the Bhagavatam especially, and it can bewilder people. They can think, well, it doesn't make any sense. This is not scientific. That's because they're not understanding the purpose behind it. And this is the problem with the intellectual types. Intellectual types, sometimes they just want to, there's one particular personality I've been preaching to he's been devoted longer than I have, but because I've been preaching to him for many years. But he's so intellectual, he just always is talking about this thing and that thing and this thing. It's like, no, Krishna, look at Krishna, that's the goal. Krishna, love Krishna, just chant Hare Krishna. That's the real goal of the whole process, to love Krishna, not to try to understand why Shukadev Goswami says that, or where Prabhupada says the sun is farther away, is closer to the earth than the moon is. This is, now we can accept that in the context that it is helping us get closer to Krishna. That worldview is helping us get closer to Krishna. When we accept that the pole star is the Dhruvaloka and that the whole planetary systems are going around it. Now, these are also true things. I'm not saying they're not true. They're more true than what we perceive, but we have imperfect senses. So we have to go to a different dimension of consciousness. And we do that by hearing. This is the idea that no one would know Krishna. We know Krishna is real. Ideally, you should know Krishna is real. Pratyak savagimam dharmam susukam kartamavyayam. If you chant Hare Krishna, you do this devotional service, you have pratyak. No one can deny Krishna's existence if you've been a devotee for some time and you're serious and you're chanting very nicely and you're serving Krishna. You see Krishna is so miraculous, doing amazing things in your life and the lives of others. This is incredible. So we have that experience of knowing and loving Krishna. So we can accept the Bhagavatam as Krishna himself, as being something that's beyond our perception, another higher reality. So in one sense, what we see is just this bottom of the x-axis. But in order to really perceive things, we have to go way up to the top of the y-axis, understand and see things the way that a great sage is seeing things. And this is why the yogis in India, they can jump into the water in the Himalayas and come out at Prabhas. They can come out at, the end of the Ganges. They can do like that because they have a higher understanding. They have a higher level of reality they're working with. So we also can expand our consciousness by following the process of Krishna consciousness. So we'll shift gears here. I wanted to speak a little bit about, Prabhupada mentions the Gayatri mantra that we chant every day. And I just finished a wonderful book by His Holiness Sachidananda Maharaj on the Gayatri mantra. And it really expanded my experience of Gayatri so deeply. Because it's very easy to kind of neglect Gayatri. It can be easy to neglect or to do bad Gayatris. But there's so many wonderful benefits from chanting Gayatri. And in a sense, we have this understanding that the holy name is everything. Holy name is everything. And actually, Nam Prabhu is everything. But the Gayatri Mantra is a great help for chanting the holy name. And there's so much scriptural evidence to this. And the common example that's given is a Gopakumar, whom was basically initiated into the Gopal Gayatri Mantra, which is the 6th of the 7 Gayatris that Gaudiya Vaishnavas chant. And this mantra has so much mystic power. And there's actually all these mystical powers it has. And if you say that mantra with some material desire, it'll come true. Not encouraging anybody to do that. But it's a fact. It's very, very mystical. And sometimes devotees have had stories. And Maharaj tells a story how he chopped open his leg, but he was staying on an island in the middle of Croatia, in this lake. But he was just there for Kartik to just chant. He said, if I leave the island, I'm not going to be able to chant my Kartik Vrat, because he chants like so many rounds, and that Maharaj is a serious japa chanter. And so he took shelter of the Gopal Gayatri Mantra and chanted it. And he said his leg actually mystically healed in front of him. The leg actually healed right in front of his eyes. So I'm not encouraging anybody to use these mantras for that purpose. And in fact, it's a really bad idea. But I mean, he was doing it for a particular reason, to help his devotional service. But in any case, these mantras are very powerful. But the idea is that Gopakumar chanted this mantra very, very rigidly. And basically, it took him all the way to a pure devotee. It took him to deep absorption in the holy name, and it took him to Krishna's embrace. It took him directly to Krishna's embrace. And so these mantras have the ability to reveal our spiritual position and Krishna's spiritual position. They're very, very powerful mantras, and they're meditations. Each word is so deep. For instance, we have this Om. Om means so many things. Impersonalists have a definition of Om, but the Gaudiya Vaishnavas writing the Bhagavad Gita even have an understanding of Om as being A being Krishna, U being the Jiva, and M being Srimati Radharani. So when you invoke the word Om, you're invoking Radha, Krishna, and the Jiva. And then, just what we have here, I don't want to get too much into it, but Bhur, Bhuva, Swa, the 3 planetary systems, also has so many meanings, because those meanings also mean that we have those meanings in our bodies, the lower, middle, upper, and that the sun, Savitor, which is the name of Krishna, all the demigods are named after Krishna. Shiva is auspicious, it's all named after Krishna. Savitor, the sun, is also Krishna, and that's lighting up all the planetary systems. It's lighting up our entire bodies, lighting up everything. And so it's a prayer that's lighting up our life. So there's so much meaning into every word of the Gayatri Mantra. And when you chant it with that deep understanding, then it really has so much potency. For instance, the Guru Gayatri, the seed mantra, Aing, it is the mantra which invokes Balaram Tattva. It's also associated with Saraswati. And so within that single seed of that mantra, one is developing intense spiritual wisdom if it's taken in the proper context. And so all those mantras are leading up to this Kama Gayatri, which is considered by our acharyas the most powerful Gayatri mantra, and which reveals Radha Krishna's abode, Radha Krishna Leela, so many things. Also, these Gayatri mantras are especially shedding light on the 3 elements of knowledge, which are Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. For instance, the Gopal Gayatri invokes 3 deities, Krishna, Govinda, and Gopijana Vallabha, is referring to the Madan Mohan deity, which is the deity of Sambandha Gyan. It's the deity that reveals our relationship with Krishna. Then the Abhideya deity is the Govinda Jigi deity, and the Prayojana deity is the Gopi Janavalabha deity, the Gopinath deity, which is the rasa dance and so forth. And so there's also an element of those in all the Gayatri mantras, where it's describing the living entity's relationship with that being. That one is, first and foremost, the first part of every Gayatri mantra is describing the relationship with that being. For instance, the Gauranga Gayatri is saying, first and foremost, that Lord Chaitanya is the source of consciousness, and he's maintaining every living entity. He's maintaining the living entities. Let me meditate on him, and he's enthusing me. You see, this is the relationship, action, and result. So we should take it very seriously, our chanting Gayatri. It's not something to be wasted. When you take it seriously, you get a deeper level of Krishna consciousness. I know that I was very neglectful of my Gayatris for a while there because, preaching late. And of course, that's superior. Preaching is superior. But if we have the opportunity to do them nicely when we're not preaching or when there's not actually higher thing, we should do them very nicely. Try to do them on time. Try to do them with deep meditation because they'll make us go deeper. Yeah. Let me see, is there anything else in this purport? So I'll just give a little review as to what I said in the class, little summary. So we're hearing about how Priyavrata chopped the Bhumandala into 7 oceans. And it's very hard for us to understand how there's an ocean of milk, there's an ocean of liquor, there's an ocean of sugarcane juice out there. And we're not perceiving these things. But our senses are, in fact, limited. And therefore, Narada Muni says that although these literatures are imperfectly composed, they're heard, sung, and accepted by purified men who are thoroughly honest. And in doing so, that gives us a worldview by which we can attain Krishna consciousness. It gives us a worldview to attain Krishna consciousness. And that higher perception is available for those who attain Krishna consciousness. The demigods and higher beings, great sages, and so forth. So we can then perceive things in a higher level. Yeah. Any questions or comments? Yes.
So that quote about them being imperfectly composed, I just saw, there's that huge debate about
that verse.
Changing.
That verse is given a lot in regards to that. That's what I asked Naveen Nurda, and he quoted that verse to me.
Yeah, and I think that's important to keep it in mind, because I think we can get so distracted by these, these so-called controversies, while kind of completely forgetting that, we should be focusing on Krishna, and so I've heard that verse used a lot in that context.
Yeah, that verse is used a lot in that context because it's giving us a worldview by which we can obtain this experience of Krishna Bhakti. We can attain that experience of Krishna Bhakti by accepting this worldview. And there's so much in that worldview that the Bhagavatam is presenting. The Bhagavatam is presenting a worldview that there are demigods and earth is alive. Earth is a personality who's praying to Krishna for mercy and help. And it's describing a different way that creation takes place. All of this stuff it's describing is real. It's not that it's fake or made up. It is real. But it doesn't mean science isn't real according to our perceptions. That's the nature of illusion. Illusion appears real. Illusions are real, but they're just not true. You see, there's a difference. We can't deny that illusions exist, but illusions aren't true. They're not the fact, but they are real. And so this material world has so many elusive elements. Our senses are elusive. But we can accept the fact by hearing from those who are not in illusion. And therefore we can, by accepting that fact, we enter into a worldview by which Krishna is available. But if you just stay on that intellectual platform with this stuff, if it's taken out of context, well, these people believe that there's an ocean of milk and God's laying on a giant snake, and he's getting a foot massage from some lady on a giant snake in an ocean of milk. Now, if you hear things like that, and we hear that the Christians say sometimes to us, I heard this. I mean, literally, this happened to me on book distribution. Me and Gaur Sundar, and the psychotic Christian guy was saying, Krishna's not God. Krishna steals butter. Krishna's not. And he was chasing the Harinam, chanting this, his mantra, Krishna is not God, Krishna steals butter. So, you know, he was trying to go to the calculus class, but he's not even a kindergartner yet.
Yeah.
In terms of spiritual life. So there's a whole process. That's why there's 10 topics of Srimad Bhagavatam. That's why it starts off with Sarga. Okay, everybody wants to know God's the creator. It gives a very logical scientific explanation as to how creation takes place based on consciousness. And most devotees don't even really understand it. It takes, you have to study it with people, and you can understand this Sarga, how it's perfect. It's perfect, the description of creation. So it's leading us up to this point of understanding Krishna, which is Ras. So that's a very deep thing. And therefore we should remember the essence. Vaidashta Sharvirahameva Vedyo Vedanta Krid Veda Videva Chaham. All the Vedas are leading us to Krishna. If the Vedas don't lead you to Krishna, then it's useless. Dharma Swanushtita Pumsam Vishvakshina Katashriyaha. Not Padiyadatim Ratim Shrama Eva Kevalam. Shrama Eva Kevalam, it's useless. Any other points? Good. Yes, Prabhu.
Sure. You brought up the topic of the changed books. You know, there's many senior devotees, they try to reel me into their camp, and it kind of stuck, in my opinion. I mean, into this, it just seems a little odd. And how do you what do you do at that point? They're very senior, and what do you say? I mean, not all of them are doing that, of course, but some are. I just want to say, could you please just go out and preach? Really, we have a goal here, right? You want to say that, but, so what do you do at that point when they're very senior?
Oh, well, I just say, I just act pretty much humbly, and, I have my own thoughts, and I agree with you 100%. I mean, I've read both. I read the original Gita first. I was given a Gita that was the original 72 Gita, and I loved it. And then I read the yellow Gita that we have now, and I loved it. And I think there's goods and bads in both, and they're both available, so it's not really such a big deal. Like, they're actually both available. Even the BBT prints, the BBT itself prints the 72 Gita. So it's like, there are things in that Gita that are really weird things that don't make sense, like certain sentences that I'm really glad they edited. So I think it's the same way, it's one of those things that doesn't matter so much. Sometimes if I have a certain relationship with them, I try to just explain to them that, it's not that Prabhupada wrote one and then they changed it. It's that Prabhupada spoke his Prabhupada English. We hear Prabhupada's classes. We know how he spoke. And then Hayagriva edited one and Jayadvaita Swami edited one. So it's basically, who do you like as a better editor? That's really the question. But they have a misconception that they think, well, they changed Prabhupada's Gita. Well, if you want to read Prabhupada's Gita, go find the manuscript for Bhagavad Gita. They have chapters 1 through 6 and chapters 13 through 18. They don't have the middle chapters. You can read the manuscript and you can see it's, Prabhupada's message is there in all three, but, you can't just take an unedited book and publish it. So 2 different editors. So I can explain that to them if that's, if they're open to it. But so many people are one of those kind of bigoted topics. So I just say, Hare Krishna Prabhu, shake my head, like the Indian shake, it's not yes nor no. And, like you said, is we can't, get into this thing with senior devotees.
Right.
But if they're really sometimes I've seen they're being very offensive toward Jayadvaita Swami to me is one of my favorite devotees. He's really wonderful. He really inspires me a lot. And, he's spent time with him. And he's like the most severely and radically surrendered personality, austere, surrendered person to Prabhupada. And so I think, and he's going around, he's traveling for so many years, spreading the holy name, teaching Krishna consciousness. And so to be offensive toward him, it just seems like a really bad thing to do. So if I hear that, I try to just avoid.
All right. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Kirtanesvara Bhagavatam ki. Srila Prabhupada ki. Are we offline?
Not yet.